Welcome to the Highly Sensitive Person Podcast, a podcast for people who experience the world intensely. Join me on a journey of acceptance of our highly sensitive person traits. Welcome to the podcast. I'm your host, Kelly. Today, I am happy to have a special guest here, Dr. Amy Banks. And the reason I wanted to bring her on the show is because I read an article that she was interviewed for recently on Vice.com, where she talked about loneliness. The title of the article was, "An Expert Explains Why You Feel So Lonely All the Time." Yeah, and that title really grabbed me because it's something I see come up all the time among introverts and introverted HSPs. That we love our alone time, we love solitude and peace and quiet, and we sometimes think we can go through life alone and not needing other people because making and having friends and even dealing with family can be stressful and tiring. So we think, maybe I don't really need that many people. But then we realize that being alone is pretty awful too, and we actually do need people. So this article really spoke to me, and I think this topic may be of interest to some of you as well. So I was very pleased when Dr. Amy Banks agreed to be on the show to share her expertise. So before we jump in, I'd like to tell you a little more about her. Amy Banks, MD, was an instructor of psychiatry at Harvard Medical School, and she's now the director of advanced training at Jean Baker Miller Training Institute at the Wellesley Centers for Women. Her newest book is called Wired to Connect. Dr. Banks has devoted her career to studying the neurobiology of relationships and how our social interactions shape our brains. She treats patients who suffer from chronic disconnection, which is the result of years of focusing on individual success and neglecting relationships. Amy, thank you so much for taking the time to speak to me today.
Thanks for having me.
So I wanted to start off by asking you, why is it bad to have that state of mind, to think that you can do everything alone, just stand on your own 2 feet, be self-sufficient? Why is that not an ideal way to be?
Well, the primary reason it's not an ideal way to be is that it actually goes against your physiology. Literally, we are born, sort of each one of us human beings are born more as pack animals than as, like I always like to say, we're not turtles or, amphibians or something like that, where we're born with everything we need to just kind of get spit out of the mom and then keep going, right? That kind of an animal has all these instincts to survive and all of that. And what we have as human beings is instincts to connect, right? Literally, and what we need is to have safe, close relationships in order for those reflexes to connect, to develop into really these robust pathways for connection that actually allow us to feel, very calm, very accepted, resonant when we're in the company of people that we're safe with, right? And that's how our physiology, that's literally how our bodies and our brains are built. So it stresses us out is the very short answer.
So where did this come from that things have changed over time and now our society is changed to value self-sufficiency and doing things alone so much versus more of a community-based type of society?
You know what? It's really a fascinating question, and there have been a lot of people that have written about it. Robert Putnam wrote a book called Bowling Alone. I can tell you that, it's something that I've given a lot of thought to, and I think there's something about American culture, right? That pioneering spirit that was so celebrated, the hyper independent thinker who's going to create on their own, the next new invention, the next new technology. And that it sort of got ingrained, if you will, or entwined with capitalism, right? And so, all of a sudden this kind of notion of success got tied into, being the best, the brightest, the fastest, the most creative, the most all of that. And focused in a very individual way. I often say, and partly probably because I'm now living in Lexington, Massachusetts, where it all began, that we literally separated from Britain in order to have our own system. And somebody took that to the nth degree.
Huh. That makes so much sense when you explain that about capitalism. I mean,
Yeah,
look at it versus communism, which was such a huge thing in the US for so long that we were so anti and fighting communism.
that's right.
Literally,
Yes.
communism has the word community in it.
That's right. It has right, and really, not that I'm a communist, but when the concept is done right,
Mm-hmm.
it is more about community, right? It's erasing, if you will, the individual differences, and what we do is we maximize those, and we maximize them, unfortunately, at the detriment to each and every one of us.
And as I work from home for myself, and I'm always reading these things about solopreneur, like the entrepreneur, but it's a solopreneur. And that's like this hot buzzword right now. Everyone wants to be a solopreneur. And it's all about this pride of doing everything on your own and not needing other people or like a boss to tell you what to do.
Exactly. It's like it gives you a little bit of shine or gleam, right? If you do it on your own, it's a value system that is built into everything in this culture. It's really scary.
It's kind of shocking how we try to do things so alone nowadays. And of course, with all of our computers and internet and everything, it's so easy to do everything online and not have to connect. I mean, the old days, everybody went into an office all the time, or whatever your job was,
Yes.
you went somewhere physically. And now it's more and more you can do stuff from home.
Yeah.
This trend of people wanting to be alone and self-sufficient, do you think it's sometimes due to wanting to avoid the pain and hurt of relationship or the feeling of rejection?
Absolutely. I think it's a huge part is that. And you see, when you start with a culture, right, that promotes separation and individuation, what it then doesn't value is the very basic relational skills that we all needed to learn and needed to build on and, have inside of us to go out into those relationships so that we can do the hard things, right? To be angry and be okay with it, to have somebody angry with us and have our, what I say, the smart vagus nerve help settle us down and know that anger belongs in a healthy relationship, right? That conflict is a part of a healthy relationship. And so if we don't, the only way you learn that is when that's being modeled for you and when you're having an opportunity to practice it. And if that doesn't happen because what we're being taught is these other people don't have to impact you. You don't have to consider what they say about you, right? Their opinions don't matter. I mean, there's a whole bunch of stuff that helps us become these compartmentalized, boundaried, hyper-boundaried individuals. We're missing relational skills that are necessary to try to avoid the pain.
Wow.
Right?
I was just letting that soak in.
Yeah.
Do you think that this trend in the US, and I know in some Western European countries and Japan, for example, there's this trend of more and more people deciding not to have children. Do you think that could be related to this as well, as this wanting to be alone and not kind of be hampered by this stressful, difficult thing about having children?
Yeah, it's interesting. It certainly could be, couldn't it? I mean, the more self-oriented you are, let me tell you, the less you're going to want to have kids, right? because there's nothing almost more selfless than having children. So, though I've not looked at any studies or literature on that, I certainly can see that as being kind of almost almost an inevitable outgrowth of that. You don't want to be hindered. You want to be able to build yourself up. And children really do that in a different way, right? You have to be able to value those moments of intimacy in family, in, even with your spouse or partner, if you choose to have a child with a partner, right? And then those little moments that you have with a child. And if you don't believe in relationship or people building, right? Relationship people building, then those don't become very rewarding.
Like you would have to value the intimacy and the relationship with your child more than you value your quest to pursue your career or be
exactly
pursuing self-full things.
Right. Yeah. And it becomes, we become very dichotomous, right? We're either going to be somebody who values relationship or values ourselves. And we've built bigger and bigger selves.
In another interview that you did, I heard you mention that people with low levels of social support have a higher premature death rate. I think 340% higher, which is horrifying, of course.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, that was one of my messages early on when I started doing this work and really trying to talk with people about it, share it, teach it, and all of that, is really getting it that we're not just talking about sort of an emotional, psychological downer here. We're talking about the fact that because our bodies are hardwired to connect, literally, our entire physiology, meaning our health and well-being, is connected to being connected, right? So our immune system works better when we're in healthy connection. And so there's a vast, almost this endless body of literature on the health impact of loneliness, disconnection, and it's enormous. There's a guy, Dean Ornish, who used to be, or I think he still is, actually one of the major writers on cardiac health. He promoted the Ornish diet. And out of the blue, about 10 years ago, he wrote this book called Love and Survival. And it was all about this. And I reference that book quite a bit in my book because he goes through painstakingly, study after study after study, that says why love, connection, and relationship are central, more central than anything else we do in this country of ours. Anything else medically is central to our health and well-being.
So how is loneliness versus being around others related to things physiologically like stress and dopamine?
Well, let me give you a good example. In my book, I talk about 4 pathways for connection, and I think one of them is one of the 4, which in my program that I do, it's called the CARE program, and it's kind of an assessment and action tool that you can do to build more better relationships and actually stronger pathways for connection. But C stands for the sense of calm that you can get in healthy relationship. And what that references is something called the smart vagus nerve, which is part of the human, what's called the autonomic nervous system. It's like our automatic nervous system. And most people are familiar with sort of that fight or flight response, which is the stress response, or the parasympathetic, sometimes called the freeze response, or even the relaxation response. And thinking that that's the way we deal with our environment. But apparently about 50,000 years ago, human beings, and actually mammals, developed something called the smart vagus, that is a nerve literally that travels into all of your muscles of facial expression, those muscles like where your eyebrows are, your inner ear, there's little muscles in your inner ear, your throat, both for speaking and swallowing. And when you perceive yourself to go out into the world, into a healthy relationship, a supportive community, what happens is, think about it, you usually smile, your eyebrows go up, you listen more attentively, and all of that stimulates the smart vagus, which feeds back to your stress response system and literally causes you to feel calmer, right? So biologically, we feel calmer. And when we feel calmer, it's the whole, de-stressing. We know that high stress literally impairs the immune system over time. De-stressing strengthens the immune system. And there have been fascinating studies, literally, of, for instance, somebody has gotten a cut, they do a cut like with, I don't know, something on somebody's hand, and it heals more quickly in the context of healthy relationship than out of it, wow. Right? Our whole healing system is dependent on relationship.
Wow. And that's really interesting. I wonder if that's, because I'm always thinking of things in terms of highly sensitive people. I wonder if there's some relation to that in the fact that we are so sensitive to things, if maybe that's even more amplified in a highly sensitive person. Do you think this could be possible?
I do. And I have to say, I'm not a highly sensitive person myself, but I work with a number of them, right? And I have a son, actually, that is one of these folks. And the system is so fine-tuned, right, that what is coming at the person is sort of in high relief, good, bad, or otherwise. What I think about with a highly sensitive person, the sensitive part, I think senses, which means the things that are happening in the world in relationships, but also sometimes it can be around sounds or noise or whatever. it really comes into your system in a higher volume,
Mm-hmm.
right? Does that make sense?
Oh, yeah. Yeah, I absolutely live that.
Yeah, exactly. Right. So almost like your receptors have upregulated and they're just catching more and more and more of what's going through the world. Whereas people that don't have that capacity actually, there's a whole bunch that just gets screened out and slips by.
Right. It's great to hear from someone like you who is a neuroscientist to speak about high sensitivity, as this is a real thing. A lot of times people act like it's not this real thing, and we're always trying to defend.
Right,
So
right,
it's
right.
nice to hear you say that as well. That's a big reason why I wanted to speak to you so much, is that a lot of people listen to the show and they get a lot of information about, they're learning about themselves, about being
That's right.
highly sensitive. And I think this is such a huge thing, even for me personally, learning about this, about relationships. It's something I've been actively trying to improve, is being out and being a little bit more social than I have been.
Yep. Mm-hmm.
I go to meetup.com is kind of a great place to look for groups of people. There's every different interest you could imagine. That's a great way. If you really don't know where to start with meeting new people, it's a safe, comfortable way to do it.
Yeah. And I think it's so important to do, right? I love this message that just because the world, and the world I'm using as a metaphor, is so loud, it doesn't mean that you have to just hide from it, right?
Right.
What it means is some more discernment. Terms that I found helpful very it's very early on around highly sensitive people, is sort of the idea of a sensory diet, right? Is it's sort of, okay, I know that if I have to, for work, start my day on the subway with a lot of noise, with tons of people, picking up on people's energy, all of this kind of chaos, what do I need to do? How do I modulate the rest of my day, right? And what does that mean? If I want to go out and try to connect with somebody at night, what kind of person do I need to have? Do I need a quiet glass of wine with somebody where we'll just chit chat? Do I,
Right.
really about kind of respecting and really knowing yourself and what you need, and that being highly sensitive does not mean non-relational, right?
Yes, absolutely. Especially for introverted HSPs.
Absolutely.
I have a friend who is an introvert. I'm actually not sure if he's HSP, but he's an introvert. And we've talked about this before, how sometimes we get in these modes where we feel like we don't need anyone. But then something will always come up that reminds you that, wow, I really do need people. And I've discovered myself, when I hang out with some friends that I really enjoy and have like a really good chat, I feel incredible afterwards. It's almost like I'm on a high just from having like a nice, pleasant conversation with somebody that I enjoy.
Right. And that's, that's the biggest gift of relationship, right? I would say you mentioned earlier that whole dopamine reward system. And I think that's what you're talking about, right? Is that our dopamine reward system that gives us that zest or energy. Actually, one of my colleagues, Jean Baker Miller, sort of really put together healthy relationship and that concept of zest, or the energy that you get in a good conversation or a good kind of connection. And, that dopamine reward system in the beginning is connected to healthy relationships. So the hug and the holding and the cooing and the feeding and all of that gives you that hit of dopamine, so that you have energy and motivation and excitement to go out into the world, right? And do other good, healthy things. And so that's sort of one of those standard identifiers for me of, I've just been in a healthy connection. Right?
Yeah.
I had that sense of zest. And you want to keep that alive. And when people are telling you to separate and that you don't need people, we begin to really disconnect the dopamine reward system from healthy relationship, And because people need dopamine, right? We literally need it as a form of motivation and energy. We go other places to get dopamine. And 9 times out of 10, they're not good places, right? They're the bar, the pastries, mall, the whatever.
Pastries, you found mine right there.
I found mine. Let me tell you.
Yeah. And that leads to something I also wanted to ask about is, since we get dopamine from connecting, and you just mentioned that it's almost like we start to lose the ability to have dopamine from connecting, so we look for it in other places. Could that be related to why people online, there's sort of this epidemic of online bullying and tearing other people apart online? Is that related to dopamine almost in like a reverse evil way, like a sinister way?
Well, one of the ways that you can get a dopamine hit is by establishing power over other people. Okay. So, and that's unfortunate, right? So you really can get a little bit of that same high by trying to gain power. And I think that's one of the ways that power over systems kind of reproduce, right? Is you've got somebody at the top who's bullying or, really invested in having the power, and the people underneath them can see, okay, this is how this works. The only way that I'm ever going to get out of this is to get power myself, right? And they come up through that system until they get the power, or they just look around them and they think of who they can then have power over. And I think you do get that in a way with the cyberbullying.
Right.
People who are felt left out and don't know how to connect can feel momentarily better by getting power over other people.
Interesting. Yeah, that makes sense that you would get a dopamine, burst from the feeling of power as well.
Mm-hmm.
So what about having relationships with animals? Can that replace people, or can it sort of replace people?
Yes.
Not replace wasn't the right word to use.
Yes,
but
it can. So, probably not if you want somebody to help you button your shirt, right? I mean, but for, a lot of the kind of love and affection, animals actually can be far less complicated than people.
Yeah.
Right. And I hear that from a lot of people who really say, okay, my best friend is my dog, or my best friend is, my cat, or whatever. But from mammals particularly, okay, you can get a very similar physiological improvement. Literally, you can get a lot of the same advantages that you do with people.
Yeah. I mean, when I spend time with my dog, and anyone who has a pet, you probably totally know that feeling of just like this incredible feeling of joy sometimes when, something happens or she does something funny that makes me laugh. So that's good to know.
And literally the physical contact, right?
Yeah.
The physical contact.
Oh my petting her, because my dog has really soft fur. She's kind of like a poodly dog. All the time. Just touching her. And, I don't think about it much, but even I just sit there and just pet her without even thinking about it.
That's right. And that touch will do that. It stimulates dopamine and oxytocin. There's actually a study, a guy that has written a book. I can't remember it, and I'm sorry about that, but has written a book about who actually has been scanning dogs' brains and finds that they too, they're human, kind of, it stimulates their dopamine reward system. So it's reciprocated.
Dogs are amazing.
Yeah. Okay.
They are. Right now, I'm going to take a little break to share a message from this episode's sponsor. Now that it is fall and the weather's starting to cool down, I'm really excited about increasing my tea consumption. I love drinking tea. There's something comforting about the ritual of it. So I want to tell you about a great monthly tea subscription that I discovered recently from a company called Plum Deluxe. Plum Deluxe is from Portland, Oregon, and they have a Tea of the Month club that is only $10 per month. I love the idea of getting a new tea in the mail every few weeks. With the subscription, you get enough hand-blended tea for about 20 cups. You also receive a free sample of one additional tea and access to the great private Facebook group of fellow tea lovers, which might actually be my favorite part. This is the perfect time to order and get in on next month's shipment. Not to mention that this would make an excellent gift. Don't forget, Christmas is right around the corner. You can cancel your membership anytime. And apologies to international listeners, but this is only available in the US and Canada. Just go to highlysensitiveperson.net/tea to find out more about this special offer from Plum Deluxe. Now, back to the episode. So, because our society like this, especially in the United States, is valuing the solo, do it alone mindset. Is there any way we can fix society so it stops stressing that type of living?
Yeah. My first answer is yes, absolutely. Okay. Because what we do know is that our brains are incredibly plastic. We can change the way we behave, the way we think. And when we do that, it actually does change then the structures that we set up to support ourselves, right? And each other. But we have to be very aware that what we are up against actually is this hypercapitalism, right? And when you start sort of saying, and I'm not saying that you can't be capitalist and have relationships, because I think you actually can, but you have to begin to start thinking about the way that our society, both economically and our social institutions, are set up. We have to go from a model of power over, right? And go from a model of, the 1% having 99% of the wealth. You have to go for a model of cooperation, and there is plenty of research that says businesses and all of that really do work as well, if not better, under a cooperative model. It doesn't mean that we don't have leaders. It doesn't mean, that there aren't even some hierarchies. But the concept is, are the hierarchies about keeping power in power's place? Or is it about creating systems that work efficiently and really maximize all human functioning, right? So that's sort of on this global scale. Individually, I think each and every person can do sort of a relational inventory. Who are the people in my life? What is the quality of my relationships? And how can I begin to deconstruct what society is telling me over and over, right? And you're going to see it in everything from advertisements to, everywhere is this message of separation and individuation and the strong individual.
Yeah. And even as you were saying, to switch from the idea of power to more of cooperation, almost like this little alarm went off in my head, because I've been so ingrained as an American to think, oh no, that's bad. It almost sounds like you're talking about communism,
Right. That's right. Yeah. But that's exactly what we have to start noticing, right? Because I'm not saying communism. I don't think the communist system, we haven't seen anyone that's worked well.
Right.
So I'm not saying communism. I'm saying systems that, where a group of people get together and they have not the same role, but equal value and equal respect, right?
Right.
And they're moving towards creating X, Y, or Z, whatever the product is. It's not that, and that really puts relationship, the value of relationship, front and center. And when you do that, policies have to switch, right? It gets into things like the United States not giving parents, mandated parental leave.
Yeah.
Right? That's a key one, because though we know in brain development, those first months in a year of life are absolutely critical to keeping developing these pathways for connection, right? So there are whole sets of social policies that we don't have in place, right? Because we're so independent driven.
Right. And it's seen as a weakness to won't feel like you have to depend on someone else. Like you should be able to do everything alone and be strong and tough. As you were talking, I thought back to some jobs I've had. And one job in particular I had that I always think of very fondly as being the best job I ever had. The main part was because my boss, he sort of espoused some of the things that you just mentioned. Like it was never about him having power over us. He treated us all very equally, as if all of our thoughts and our input was super valuable, and it was a great team environment. And I've never worked anywhere else like that, where we all support each other. There was no feeling of competition between me and my coworkers. And it really did feel great.
It does feel great, because that's where those environments are where, where a real, like a different kind of a leader, a relational leader, right, actually harnesses the positive power of relationship. And when you can do that, this is the crazy thing, right? When you actually can do that, the productivity is so much better. right?
Yeah.
We somehow think that if we don't pit everybody against each other, that everybody's going to be lazy,
Right.
right?
Yeah.
That this idea that we want to work for our coworkers doesn't occur to us, right?
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
All we're going to want to do is work for ourselves and our own benefit.
You're totally right, because me and my coworkers worked really hard because
Yeah.
we wanted to make our boss proud, because he trusted us and help out our team. And it really was such a wonderful feeling of teamwork.
That's right. That's right. And if you think about it, for people out there who are interested or follow sports, right? The teams that always succeed are the ones where they come together as a team, right?
Yeah.
Where there aren't all these individual stars, and it's sort of, okay, some people are better than others at X, Y, or Z.
Right.
But when you come together as a team, the sum of the parts is bigger than the whole kind of thing, right? I mean, it really rises everybody's game.
Yeah.
And, that's what relationship can do, because you're calmer, right? I mean, you feel included, you feel accepted, you're not worrying about being left out or excluded or what have you. And we don't, I think, as a society, we put almost zero kind of energy into leveraging that.
Yeah. So for people who are listening right now and thinking that this is really hitting home for them, like, wow, I have been neglecting relationships in my life. Maybe this is part of why I've been getting sick or just feeling sad in my life more in general. What are some tips you could give on how to maybe make more friends or build your relationships? What are some things you tell the people that you work with who have chronic disconnection?
So, one of the things I have people do, and this is going to, after I've just done this whole teamwork thing, I'm going to put out, this is very self-promoting, but I would have people go to my website, which is amybanksmd.com. And on that, I have something I call a relational assessment tool. Okay. And what the person can do, and it's a good way to get started in figuring out, where am I in this whole relational world, right? And what I have people do is the assessment has 20 questions, and you pick out the number of people that you, or the people that you spend the most time with, right? So it's not the people that are closest to you per se, but the ones that you spend the most time with, thinking that to the nervous system, more time means more stimulation, means building certain pathways, right? And then with each person, they go down and they answer this set of questions anywhere. And the questions range from, I can be in conflict with this person, to I trust this person, to I laugh with this person. And a couple of things will happen. Number one, they're going to get a different essence of how their relationships are impacting their health and well-being, right? Going through the questions, they're also going to be educating themselves about, what are the qualities? What should I be looking for in my relationships? What's a healthy relationship, right? And this is work that has been done in what's called relational cultural theory, the Jean Baker Miller Training Institute, that I've worked on with my colleagues for many, many years, many decades actually at this point. And they can take that and literally get a snapshot of, okay, this relationship is moderately safe. This one is safe. This one is not so safe. And to begin to think about taking relational risks within the relationships that can support them, right? My worry is always that we come from this culture where relationship skills aren't taught, right? And then we say, oh, go and try to be angry here, or go and try to tell, one secret you've never told before there. And then the person, they'll come back to me and they'll be like, oh my God, that was a disaster. And 9 times out of 10, it's like, there's not a pairing of what I'm going to say to whom, it's sort of indiscriminate.
Right.
And so what I really have tried to think about for people is how to break down this whole relational mishigas, if you will, into something where you, can kind of take it in bite-sized pieces, right? Learn more about yourself, more about your relationships. And from that assessment, you actually will get what's called a care score, but it's about your own neural pathways for connection and how they're functioning.
That's excellent. I will have a link to that relational assessment tool in the show notes for this episode, so anyone who's interested can find that. It
costs nothing.
Yeah, that sounds like a wonderful tool. Well, before I wrap up, is there anything else that you want to talk about that I didn't ask?
Well, the one thing for introverts, right, is I'm not sure I made this point strongly enough, but I wanted to, which is, to just be very clear that introverts aren't people that don't need people,
Oh,
right?
right.
The way that I think of introversion and extroversion is more, actually, as you're framing it, somewhat in terms of sensitivity, and that an introvert needs connection, but an introvert who has these pathways for connection that are robust and healthy actually can go out, have an interaction, and then it lives within them longer
Oh, yeah.
than it does for other people. Right?
Yeah,
So
definitely.
when, for extroverts, it's almost like the half-life is shorter and they need to
Yeah.
get right back out there. But for introverts, they take it in and it stays in there, lives in there longer. And I think that's really a much different way to think about it than, oh, I don't need that.
Right. That is beautiful. I love that.
Yeah.
It's kind of like a little gem that you have, like this little thing that you have with you that you sort of treasure, and it just feels good and it's sort of glowing inside of you.
That's right. That's right. And any introvert will know, they know the difference between being alone with yourself and your friends, right? But alone versus lonely.
Yes.
Which is a very different thing.
Yeah, I'm glad that you made that distinction, because a lot of people do get confused about the word introvert and they think it just means, I don't ever want to be around anyone ever, just leave me alone. That's sort of a different thing. That's not really introversion.
Yeah.
Dr. Banks, thank you so much for taking the time to share your knowledge today with some of us introverted HSPs. I think it could be extremely valuable, just the realization that maybe we need to examine our relationships and work on them a little bit more. Maybe they need a little bit more attention than we realize, because it can affect our life and our health so much. So thank you so much for your time.
Oh, you're so welcome. Thanks for the work you're doing.
Thank you.
Be well.
You can find Amy online at amybanksmd.com, and she also has a column on Psychology Today called Wired for Love. And be sure to check out her newest book called Wired to Connect. You can find her on Twitter as amybanksmd. I'll have links to all of these things, as well as her relationship assessment tool, in the show notes at highly-sensitiveperson.net/episode 70. While you're at the website, don't forget to sign up to my newsletter, where you'll receive updates on new podcast episode, blog posts, and interesting HSP news. I'd also like to give a big shout out to the newest Patreon supporter, Gloria. Thank you so much for your support of the show at patreon.com. Thanks for tuning in. I hope you have a great day.